Welcome back to the Donkey Vote podcast with Francis.
Tobias.
And George. These interviews will be focusing on the past careers of politicians before they entered parliament.
With a strong intention to our audience that anything is achievable no matter what you studied in university or college.
If you like this sort of content, please make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and share with your friends. Also, we are on YouTube and Spotify, so make sure you follow us on those platforms.
Make sure to follow us on Instagram as well to keep updated with the latest episodes and reels that we release.
Enjoy the
interview.
And today we are joined by Andrew Rosindell, the member of parliament for Romford. So, Andrew, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Great to be with you this evening.
Yes, I do really appreciate you coming on the podcast. As I said before, it's about 11:20 p.m. In London right now, so that's a lot of dedication to come on the podcast. So I don't know if I could do an interview at 11:28 p.m. Australian time. So thank you again for coming on, Andrew. Yes,
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
no problem at all. So just for our audience out there who may not know an entire lot about yourself and probably about your constituency of Romford, could you give us a little brief description of both just before we get into the questions?
Yeah, so I've been a member of parliament for 23 years. I was elected in 2001, and I was the first seat to go back to the Conservatives after Tony Blair won the election in 97. And I'm the longest serving MP in Romford, which is a town in Essex, but it's on the east of London. So it's like 20 miles from Westminster, where we are this evening. So it's a very sort of outer London area. It orbits London, but it's really Essex. And the people there are very entrepreneurial. They're market traders, they're city workers, they're people that like free enterprise. They like the idea of freedom and democracy and all the things that I champion as a member of parliament. So it's my hometown. I was born there, brought up there, went to school there. And so I'm very much around peg in a round hole in Romford.
Think of an Australian sort of equivalent that'd be similar to maybe a town like Pakenham in the southeast, maybe 40, 50 kilometers away from just outside probably the metropolitan sort of sphere, but still very much, a part of Melbourne itself and, has a lot of agricultural industry around the place. So, I guess it's quite similar in that sense to, similar towns in Australia.
Yeah, and we've got a bit of rural area, and it's sort of like very much on the edge of Greater London. So from the north of my constituency, it's very rural. There are farms, there are horses, there are rivers and lakes. It's a wonderful area, but most of my constituency is quite urban. So in Romford, it's a very quick journey into London. It's like 40 minutes to the West End on the Elizabeth line, which was named after the Queen in the year of the Platinum Jubilee. And we only have two Elizabeth line stations, so we're not on the London Underground. So in many ways, we're not London, but in some senses, we're very close to London. So we have the best of both worlds, really. We're sort of like the link between Essex, the countryside, and the east of England on one end, and then London, which is towards the other side. So we sort of bridge the two. And traditionally, many years ago, it used to be a Labour constituency, but today it is a Conservative constituency. And despite the election defeat that we've just gone through, we still managed to keep it Conservative. So actually, it's it's a wonderful seat for me to represent because it's where I was brought up, and I definitely understand how people think. And for me, it's a great place to represent.
It's the seat as well. Probably before you won it, Andrew, it would be quite considered to be like a bellwether sort of seat, flipping and changing between both Labour and Conservatives, whoever at the time is in government. So, it's quite interesting that, you've been able to hold it now for 23 years, especially, after the 2024 election. So it really does probably show, the amount of hard work you've put in and, being a local candidate as well as seeing as you've grown up in Romford really does help in terms of, getting your getting yourself out there, getting your team out there and, making a real difference towards the community.
Yes, that's really important. I think that being local, having grown up there, been to school there all my life. I've lived in the area. It makes a big difference. So people know me and I know them and I know the area. I know every school, every church, every pub, every local organisation. And I think that these days, when people are disillusioned with all political parties, I think an MP that is actually genuinely connected to the local community makes a real difference. And in our system, I know the Australian system is slightly different, but in our system, first past the post, you win on a majority of the votes cast in that constituency, and every MP has to resonate with their local people. And I think that despite the fact that this last election was very difficult, and it should have been a Labour gain, in fact, it was predicted to be a Labour gain. On the exit poll on the night of the 4th of July, Romford was definitely going to be a Labour gain. In fact, 97% chance of Labour winning Romford, 2% chance of Reform winning, and only 1% chance of the Conservatives winning. We actually won in Romford with a clear majority. So I'm very proud to have been re-elected for my 7th term in office. So it's seven general
Not many MPs
elections.
can say they've been there for 7 years now, especially because of the amount of turnover we've had
More than
last
7 years,
election.
7 terms.
7 terms, sorry, 7 terms, sorry,
Yeah,
Andrew.
23 years. So yeah,
That's
it's been more
basically
than
that's basically almost a generation being in Parliament, Andrew. So you must be
yeah.
quite proud of the amount of time you've been able to spend in the House of
Yes.
Commons.
Yeah, no, it's been fantastic, and the people of Romford have elected me for 7 times since 2001. I'm very proud to be the MP for my hometown. It makes a real difference that I'm connected to the local area. A lot of MPs get parachuted in by party HQ.
Mm,
And I think that's one of the problems with politics at the moment, that in Britain, certainly I don't know about Australia, but in Britain,
it's happening a
there are a
bit
lot
here
of
too.
MPs that are parachuted in. They're not from the area. They don't really understand the area. They don't really connect with local people. And I think that's bad. I think that really, in an ideal world, MPs should represent the place where they come from. Now, I know it's not possible all the time. And there are lots of fantastic MPs who don't come from the area they represent. But I do think it gives you a huge advantage if you're from the local area.
It's 100% true there, Andrew. We've seen in Australia, in the past couple of years, I know we had a by-election in a seat in Eastern Melbourne where we parachuted, where the Liberals parachuted a candidate and we lost. It was a very considered a pretty safe Liberal seat to that point. So and the other candidate was pretty much a local. So it really does depend from the Labor Party. So it really does depend on who the candidate is. And I think nowadays, especially with political disillusionment, as you've been talking about, Andrew, it's really really important that we're able to get candidates who are local into these constituencies or these electorates because at the
Mm.
end of the day, people will see past now the fact that if you're living in the inner city of Melbourne or the inner city of London, and you're representing a constituency, and you want to represent a constituency in rural London or rural Victoria, like there's a huge disparity there, and I think a lot of people can see through that.
Yeah, I think so. I think that people these days are much more interested in someone who resonates with them and the local issues, local community. I think that they're pretty fed up with politicians who come in who don't really care about the local community that they're representing. And it's a stepping stone into Parliament. Great, but it's no good for the local area. So you need MPs these days have to do two things. They have to be genuinely local and genuinely interested and active in the local communities, but also they have to be good parliamentarians. And I try to do both things. And I think that's the model. I think those that simply use a constituency to be an MP to further their own political career, I think that's a failure. And I also think that those who simply do constituency stuff and don't do much in Parliament, that's also a failure. You need to do two. You need to bridge
Like,
the two. And that's the purpose of being an MP.
bridge the gap, and you got to try and make the best of both worlds. 100% agree with that,
Exactly.
Andrew. So yeah, so I think we'll move on now into our questions for you, Andrew. So my first question to you is, how was your high school and university life, and do you have any memorable moments you'd like to share on the podcast?
So I went to my local comprehensive school. I don't know if in Australia whether that is a term that you would use, comprehensive school, but
Not really,
in
no.
Britain, comprehensive school is basically a state school. It's not a private school. It's not a particular. It's not a school that is going to um, hit the headlines. Are you still there? Seems to
Yes, I'm
have
still
gone
here.
off. Okay, so it's gone off on the screen. Let me just something quite wrong with this. I've stopped seeing you. Can we just break this for a second while I sort this out? Thank you. I can see you now. Right.
Thanks
Can
for
you
that.
ask the question again? And I will. Let's
Yes,
start that bit again.
we'll start it again. So
You're going to edit this. You're going to edit this, aren't
yeah,
you?
we're gonna
Sorry.
edit this out, Andrew. No problem
Okay.
at all.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So how was your high school and university life, Andrew? And do you have any memorable moments you'd like to share on the podcast?
So I went to my local comprehensive school, which was literally over the road from where I live, in Marshall's Park in Romford, and I was very political at school. I was one of the very few people who went around school promoting Margaret Thatcher and conservative ideals. And a lot of people thought that was strange because, it's like at school, people tend to be quite left wing in their
Hmm.
views. So I was promoting a different point of view, but everyone respected the fact that I had opinions and I had views and I argued for those things. And I think that at school, although I was not the greatest academic person at school, but I was there to debate and to argue and to organize events and campaigns. And I think because of that, I had a great experience at my local school. And I went straight to work from school. I didn't go to university. I went straight to work at 17 in London. And the memory I've got, which is quite amazing, really, it was 1983. And I left school on the 10th of June, 1983. On the 9th of June 1983 was the general election where Margaret Thatcher got her biggest majority, 144. So the general election was on Thursday. I left school on the Friday and I started my job in the West End of London on the Monday. So that was a pretty big weekend of my life from Thursday to Monday, where I left school, the general election, left school and went straight to work. So in those days, going to university was not something everybody did. I'm not sure it's something that everyone should do today, to be honest. I think there's too much emphasis on going to uni rather than actually doing things in the real world. But in those days, pretty much nobody went to uni from my school, perhaps one person or two people in a class. And those days, it was a very different attitude. I went to work immediately, and I worked in London, and that's where I learnt about London, and I learned about politics. I got involved in things in London. I mean, Romford isn't London; it's outside of London, but it's 20 miles away, so it's quite close. So I started to spend a lot of time in London, and that's how I really started to get involved in politics at a regional level, which was the sort of Greater London area. And then that led on to me doing much more in the Conservative Party in the UK.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, as you were saying, a lot of people nowadays really do feel pressure to go into university and, complete a degree when in reality they might not be suited for it, or, going and, completing maybe an arts degree or something like that at a small
Mm.
university is not really going to put you far in your career. So I guess in a sense, I think we have kind of sanitized the way that, people, further on in their careers, people doing trades, people doing other sort of apprenticeships and that sort of thing have been really sanitized in our society nowadays. So I think we should really try and push for more people to do those sort of careers because at the end of the day, we can't have, over 100,000 people with an arts degree. Because they're not going to be able to fix cars, they're not going to be able to build homes, that sort of thing. So we've got to have a mix of both. So I do agree with you there, Andrew, that we really should try and push people to try and, not necessarily go to university and try and maybe do a trade or apprenticeship.
You're completely right. I think that there's been far too much emphasis on young people leaving school going straight to university. I I really don't see the value in a lot of it. I think it's getting young people into debt because they have to pay tuition fees. I don't know what the situation is in Australia, but here they get themselves into huge debt, and it doesn't lead to the jobs they expect. It's actually, I think that there's a generation that have been misled over this. What we need are people with skills, people that can do actual practical jobs. We need people that serve in the armed forces. We need plumbers, we need builders, we need electricians, we need all the skills that keep a country working. And what's happened in Britain is that we have encouraged young Britons to go to university to learn degrees. You mentioned art studies. I'm not deriding any of these. I'm sure they've all got great value to them, but there's only a limit to what you can do with these things. And a lot of people have gone to university. They've studied. They've paid a lot of money for the privilege, and it hasn't led to the jobs they expect. But we haven't got the skills that we need. And so, because of that, we've increased the amount of people coming into our country with those skills, and that's led to large amount of immigration, which has become unsustainable. So I think there's a lot of mistakes we've made since the 1990s, and we're living with the consequences of those mistakes today.
100% agree there, Andrew. 100% agree with you there. So I think we'll move on to our next question for you, Andrew. So, prior to Parliament, you were the chairman of the Young Conservatives and also the chairman of the International Young Democratic Union, respectively from 1993 to 1994 and 1998 to 2002. So, how was the job like being in charge of these two prestigious young political organizations? And do you have any memorable moments you'd like to share about being the chairman of both these organizations?
Yes, certainly. So, yes, I was chairman of the European Young Conservatives from 93 to 97. So I was National Young Conservative Chairman of the UK prior to that. That overlapped with being EYC chairman. And these were the days when everyone went along with the European Union without question. So there was lots of organizations around Europe who joined groups to support the idea of unification of Europe, which was basically creating what was effectively creating the idea of like this federation of Europe. And I was against that. I didn't agree with that at all. So we needed an organization that would oppose that idea of a federation of Europe. So instead promoting what Margaret Thatcher believed in, which was a Europe of nation states. So the European Young Conservatives was established, and I was the first chairman of that. And for my 4 years in office, I traveled to pretty much every country in Europe to find like-minded political parties to join with us to build an organization that promoted the ideas of freedom, free enterprise, free nations, liberty, and not a centralized socialist Europe, which is effectively what has been created. So Margaret Thatcher was the patron of the European Young Conservative. In the end, we had like 30 to 40 organizations from around Europe that joined, and they were students and youth organizations from all the right of centre political parties, from Iceland all the way down to Armenia. So we had Portugal all the way to Russia. So we had a vast array of organizations. Now, some of them have disappeared, some of them have evolved into new political parties, but the principles were correct. It was free people, free nations, free markets, and we coalesced around those principles. So I was very proud to lead that organization for 4 years and for Mrs. Thatcher to give us her support in doing so. And I remember you asked for a moment, a memory from that moment. So the IYG was a different organization. That was a global young conservative organization. I went on to be chairman of that after being EYC chairman. But the two sort of overlapped a bit. And in the middle of that, I think it was 1996, we had a huge dinner in London at the Britannia Hotel with Mrs. Thatcher as the guest of honor. We had 600 people there. It was a fantastic event. And the whole room was festooned with Union flags. And we had an opera singer singing Royal Britannia as Mrs. Thatcher walked on. And at that event, we had like 100 young people from all over the world who were from different political parties on the right of centre. Places like Poland that had been liberated from communism, Argentina, which it could be said, I think justifiably, that the liberation of the Falklands led to the liberation of Argentina to become a democratic country. and America and Canada, Australia, African countries, the Caribbean, all of the Eastern European countries. They were all represented at this huge dinner in Docklands at the Britannia Hotel, and Lady Thatcher came along as our guest of honor, and it was a fantastic evening. But the thing I'd like to tell you is this: she was meant to leave at 10 o'clock. Her security was meant to usher her out at 10 o'clock. And she said to me, I was sitting with her all evening, and she said to me, when are we doing the national anthem? When is the national anthem? And I said, well, Lady T, that's going to be a bit later after you've left. And she said to me, well, I'm not leaving before the national anthem. So I said to her team, I said, Lady T said she'd like to stay for the national anthem. And they said, no, she's got to go. All the security people are here. They're all ready to go. We need to get her out. So I said to her, I left it a few minutes, and I said to her again, Lady T, I'm told that everyone's ready to escort you out. So, are you ready? And she interrupted me and said, I've already said I'm not leaving before the national anthem. So, of course, they all had to back down, and she stayed right to the very end. And she stood to sing God Save the Queen. And that was so typical of Mrs. Thatcher. First and foremost, she believed in Britain. She was a patriot. She loved the Queen. She loved the British Constitution, and she would always defend it. And I'm the same. I believe in what she stood for, and throughout my time in politics, I've always stood up for those same values.
I think it's a good moment to share on the podcast, Andrew. Not many people get to spend a whole dinner and a whole night with Lady T and Margaret Thatcher, as you were saying there. So, it's something I guess you can keep close to your heart for many years to come. And I guess you can tell, your grandchildren and children as well in the future as well. Even now, of course, that you got to spend some time with the great Lady T, Margaret Thatcher.
Yes, and later on, she came to Romford to help me campaign in the
Oh,
general
wow.
election in 2001 and 2005. So she came twice to Romford and supported me. So my first election in 2001, when I got elected, she came 2 days before the election, did a walkabout in the town centre, and the whole world's media were there, and it's fantastic. And it was her last ever day of campaigning. After then, she retired from campaigning. And so I'm very proud that she chose Romford and campaigning for me to be her last ever day of actual political campaigning. And I won with the biggest Conservative swing in the United Kingdom. I got the best result for the Conservative Party in the country. So I thank her for helping me achieve that.
I guess it must mean she's got a pretty special place in her heart for you, Andrew. Seeing as you were the last your constituency, and you were the last person that got to ever campaign with her before she retired from campaigning.
Absolutely, yes. And I met her when I was 16. That was when I first met her. And I got to know her over the years. Obviously, she was Prime Minister, and then obviously after that, I got to know her better after she left office. It's very hard to get to know them when they're in office, but she knew me all those years. And when I became an MP, she was obviously thrilled that I was elected, and I went to see her regularly. And I'd always be, deeply grateful for the friendship and the support that she gave me.
I would agree with that, Andrew. I would. So moving on then to our next question for you. Additionally, you served on the Havering Council for over 8 years, actually taking the seat from the Liberal Democrats. How was your time on council, and how is it different to your time currently in the House of Commons?
So I was first elected on Havering Council to 1990. I was on for 12 years, and it was a ward that is now part of my constituency. So I've represented the ward and the constituency now for nearly 35 years in total. So being my home area, it was always a great privilege to, represent not only my constituency, but also even as a councillor, it was sort of the area that I grew up in. So I knew it really well. But being a councillor is very different than being an MP. Clearly, it's much more locally focused on local issues. As an MP, you're more focused on national and international issues. Although I think these days, being an MP, you have to do everything. So I'm very active locally on even the smallest of local issues. You know, the pruning of a tree or a pothole or the dog's mess or the state of the local park or the closure of the local library, that matters to local people. So it has to matter to the MP. You can't ignore those issues. So I get involved in all those issues as well. But it is really, you're a parliamentarian, but you're a super councillor as well. A super councillor, effectively, you do all the local stuff as well as the national stuff. So it's a massive job now. Being an MP is very different to what it used to be even, 20, 30 years ago. And it's people expect a lot. People expect their MPs to be involved in every single issue. And it's sometimes difficult. And I manage because I'm there. I'm from the local area and I understand the area. And I'm local to the area, but I'm also not far away, I mean, I'm in Westminster at the moment. I'm 20 miles away to Romford. That's not far. It's like, you know, 50 minutes on the train I can get back to Romford. So I'm in a very privileged position being an MP that's close to London. It means I can do the two things. Imagine if you're an MP in Cornwall or Yorkshire or Scotland or Wales or even the Midlands. You can't zip backwards and forwards. I can do that. I can just up sticks in the middle of the day and get back to Romford if I have to go there. But most MPs haven't got that privilege. So I'm very fortunate to have the constituency that I've got, which is so close to London.
Hop on the train and takes about, I think, as you said, 40 minutes from on the train all the way back to Romford as
40,
well.
50 minutes, depending on the rush hour, depending on the times of the trains. If you get a fast train, you can actually get there really quickly. But, you've got to reserve at least an hour to get from Westminster to Romford because you've got the tube and then you've got the train at Liverpool Street. So, it's not you can't zap there in seconds, but an hour you can do it. But I'm
So
lucky
agree.
because most
Yeah,
MPs couldn't get to their constituencies in an hour.
exactly. I
I'm
think
really fortunate.
we were talking a couple of weeks ago to John Cooper, who's one of the new MPs in Scotland for the Conservatives, and he was talking
Okay.
about how he's going to have to fly from his constituency to London every single time. So it's quite a journey. So I guess you are very lucky there, Andrew. Being able to just take the
Yes.
tube and come through.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very fortunate and I make the most of it. So, I can get back to Romford anytime I choose. And if the people need to see me, I can be there.
Exactly, Andrew. So moving on then to my next question. So, Andrew, as you said previously, you've been in Parliament for 23 years and witnessing actually over 8 prime ministers and 3 changes of government. The third one being, just recently, a couple of months ago. So, what have your highlights been of these 23 years in Parliament, and what are you looking forward to in the next 5 years in the House of Commons?
Hmm. So I have to admit that I've been in MP 23 years, and we've had a disappointing run of things, to be honest. Ever since Mrs. Thatcher left office, the country has never quite been on the right track. So we had a Labour government from 97 onwards under Tony Blair. And unfortunately, that was a government that had a lot of idealistic views about what should happen. And in principle, a lot of their views sounded good, but in practice, they've had a hugely detrimental effect on the country. So a lot of legislation that Tony Blair brought in, which we voted against, but we didn't repeal it. So unfortunately, we are living with the consequences of the Blair period. David Cameron came in after Blair and Brown, and unfortunately, we didn't really change very much. We didn't have a radical period of Conservative government. We had 14 years in office. We had 5 prime ministers. Now, Mrs. Thatcher was in office for 11 and a half years, so a little bit shorter than 14. But you consider what she achieved in those 11 and a half years compared to 14 years under 5 prime ministers. The greatest achievement, of course, was getting out of the European Union. But that was a mistake. David Cameron never intended to do that. It was always going to be, a slight alteration of our relationship with the EU. It was never meant to be a departure. And when he tried to do a deal with the European Union to change our relationship, he came back with so little that that precipitated the movement to get out in the Brexit referendum. But so in many senses, he did us a great favour by allowing us that referendum, which he thought would never go for leave. So I think the proudest moment was to being part of that campaign to to get Britain out of the European Union, to make Britain a free and independent nation again. And it was a struggle because even though we voted to leave, the political establishment in Britain didn't want us to do it. And so they tried every trick in the book to keep us in. And under Theresa May, unfortunately, there was a capitulation to this attitude. And eventually, she tried three different votes in Parliament to sign up to an agreement to leave the EU, but it was basically on their terms, which would have meant Britain half in, half out. So, to give an example, we wouldn't have had a free trade agreement with Australia under that kind of agreement. That would have been allowed because the EU controlled the trade policy. So to me, that wasn't really Brexit. That wasn't really getting out of the European Union. We were still under their control ultimately. So I voted against all three of her agreements. All three of the times she tried to get the agreement through, I voted against. And the third one was the worst of all. And I was one of the very few MPs on the Conservative side. But they called us Spartans. There was like 28 of us. And we all voted against this deal to get us out of the EU. And the argument was, if we don't accept this deal, we will never leave the EU. We're going to be stuck in. My view was, I'd rather be in and actually have a say than out, abiding by all the rules, but having no say. And I'd rather fight it for another day. So it was a gamble, but I think it was the right gamble. We voted down Theresa's deal. And the result of that is that Theresa lost office, which was sad because I think in other circumstances she could have made a great prime minister, but unfortunately she left after leading a failed government. And that, of course, brought Boris in, and Boris did get Brexit. He got Brexit fully, except with Northern Ireland, which I'm afraid is a tragedy. We've, I'm afraid, allowed Northern Ireland to still be under the remit of the EU, but Great Britain, England, Scotland, Wales, we were completely free of the EU. So we're no longer under the control of the European Court of Justice or anything else of that kind. So because of that, and because of Boris, we managed to get that majority of 80 seat majority. And although not much else was achieved, unfortunately, during Boris's premiership, the one thing that was achieved is that we left the European Union fully. And so that's probably the proudest moment for me.
What are you looking forward to, I guess, in the next 5 years? I know you guys aren't, you're not in a government anymore, Andrew, but what are some of the main priorities you're looking forward to and pushing for in the next 5 years of this parliamentary term?
Right. So we're now in opposition. So we're not in government. We can't do anything. We've got no power. And, I'm afraid that it's our own fault. We had a majority of 80. We failed to use that majority to do things. And it was very disappointing. Unfortunately, we had civil war within our own party, as all parties do. You've had the same in Liberal Party of Australia a few times, I think. Great pity. But there you go, that's politics. And I think the British people grew tired of us and they wanted to change. But they didn't want a Labour government. Don't kid yourself that Labour's got this great mandate. They haven't. They got the lowest share of the vote of any governing party ever in living memory in the UK. 33, 34% of the vote. It's tiny. Most governing parties get like 44, 45% of the vote. And the reason why we lost so badly is because we had failed and people were sick of us. And so a lot of people voted for the Reform Party. So we have a divided right. If you combine the Reform votes and the Conservative votes together, then actually Labour would not have a majority today. So the right in Britain is now split, and we will never win another election until we bring the right of centre back together again.
And I agree with that as well. And I mean, there were a lot of seats also around London that were lost around London and I guess the home counties around your area, Andrew, that were lost to the Liberal Democrats that used to be very strong Conservative constituencies as well. So there's also that factor too. So if you can bring those people back to the Conservative Party as well, you can even get a bigger majority, including with Reform as well.
Yes, that's true. I think that a lot of seats went to Liberal Democrats, but not because the people of those areas wanted to vote Liberal Democrat. They voted Liberal Democrat out of frustration because the Conservatives have failed. We were incompetent. The government was incompetent in a load of areas, and people were frustrated. So they voted Liberal Democrat just to get us out. They weren't necessarily Liberal Democrat in their views. And that can be demonstrated by the fact that in 2019, all those seats under Boris in the Brexit general election of 2019, those seats all went Conservative. So if they can go Conservative in that sort of election, it proves that they're not really Liberal Democrat in their opinions. They were just frustrated by the failure of the Conservatives to actually govern the country in an effective way. And we deserved to lose. It's sad that we did because a lot of good MPs were lost, but we brought it on ourselves. And dumping Boris, for all his, failings, and he does have failings. He's not, he did make mistakes. He was our best prime minister since Margaret Thatcher, and we should have kept with him. And I think we would not be looking at a Labour majority of what we have today if it wasn't for the fact that we got rid of Boris. If he'd been there, I think we'd have done much better. Okay, we might have still lost, but we might have just held on. I don't know. All I can say is that as soon as we dumped Boris, I think the British people gave up on the Conservative Party and the defeat was inevitable.
I'm up to my third last question for you, Andrew. So, who would you say is your political role model or idol?
So Margaret Thatcher clearly is the person that has
I was gonna
inspired me more
say.
than anybody else. It would be a lie to say anybody else than Margaret Thatcher. But I don't know if you can see my office behind me, but there's a there's a portrait over there of a I would think someone that's probably not that well known, certainly in Australia, of an MP called Ian Gow, and he was the MP for Eastbourne, Conservative MP, and I knew him from the age of 15.
Oh,
And
wow.
he came to speak at a Young Conservative event in Romford, which I organised. But he was the parliamentary private secretary to Margaret Thatcher. So he was the person that introduced me to Margaret Thatcher. And he was another person that gave me great inspiration because he was a proud believer in the United Kingdom, in the union of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. He was against one of the early people against this conveyor belt toward Euro-federalism. He was a free marketeer. He believed in free enterprise and a small state and low taxes. And he believed in strong policy on immigration. So, he was a true conservative. And although he never rose to the highest offices of state, which I regret because I think he would have been a magnificent uh, cabinet minister. He was a very close friend of Margaret Thatcher, but he was murdered by the IRA in 1990 in the last few months of Mrs. Thatcher's premiership. He was murdered by the IRA. They put a bomb under his car in Eastbourne, in his home, and he was brutally murdered in a most tragic way. And it had a big effect on me because he was a friend and an ally and someone who actually he nominated me for my original approval to be a candidate for Stanford Parliament. So that was a great sadness when he was murdered in the way that he was. Um, so yeah, he's been a great inspiration to me, Ian Gow.
You can go. And I
Yeah,
guess
look
as you
him
said,
up.
not a very popular name within, I guess, Australian politics and world politics, but it's always those sort of smaller MPs, who may not be well known that are really inspirational and very good people to look up to in terms of your own political career.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we'll move
Absolutely.
on to our next question then for you, Andrew. So, what made you run in the 2001 UK election for the Conservatives, and what made you join the Conservative Party?
So, sorry to be boring, but I joined the Conservative Party because I was inspired by Margaret Thatcher. She was Prime Minister at the time. We talked a lot about Margaret Thatcher this evening, but yeah, it's true. I mean, I realised I was a Conservative because of her. That's what really got me into wanting to join the party, because although I was only 14 at the time when I joined, uh,
Probably one of the youngest people to ever join a political party, Andrew.
yeah, one of the
It's
youngest people
quite
ever. That
young.
was absolutely. But I joined because I was just inspired by her. In fact, when I joined, I was a problem to the party because they said to me, "You've got to be 15 to join the Young Conservatives, and you're 14." They didn't know what to do with me, so they put me on the local committee of the ward, which I served on for a year before I could actually join the Young Conservatives, which is a bit of an odd situation. But no, it was her that inspired me to join the party. And look, anyone in politics, you have to evolve your views, you have to evolve your opinions, and you have to evolve, what you believe in, because you learn as you go along. But the core values are there from the start all the way through. That's how I see things. Of course, policies change because you have to adapt to whatever happens in today's world, but your values should always remain the same. And I believe that I've never compromised on the core values that I've always believed in, but you've got to adapt them to dealing with today's world and the modern circumstances and the challenges we face. And so, to some extent, there has to be some pragmatism, but it's got to be pragmatism based on principle. And I think Margaret Thatcher was exactly that. She had to be pragmatic. She had to pick her battles. She did things which were very tough but necessary. But she chose what battle she fought at each particular time. And I think that's the right philosophy in politics. Provided your values and your core principles are unshakable, I think that you can then approach all the issues that you face based on those core values and those core principles.
And what made you really run in the 2001 UK election, Andrew? Was it just really circumstance and having the opportunity to run against Labour government at that time? I think previously before 1997 it was a Conservative held seat. So, what really made you run in 2001?
So I run in 2001, I run in 1997, and I run in 1992. So 2001 was my third general election, believe it or not. But that was having fought two seats I'd lost. My first seat in 92 was Glasgow, believe it
Oh,
or not. Long way from Romford, but it was a great seat to fight. A no hope seat, east end of Glasgow, but it was a great experience. Then I stood in Thurrock, which is near to Romford, but again, it was a seat that Labour held, so I didn't win that. But then 2001, I stood for my hometown of Romford, and I got elected. So really, I was a round peg in a round hole. We had a vacancy, and I was selected by the members to be their next MP, and I was able to win the seat with the largest Conservative swing in the whole of the United Kingdom. And now this year I've become the longest serving MP in the history of Romford since the constituency was created in 1885. So
oh.
I've broken a record.
So, many more years to come. Maybe past 2029 as well, Andrew, if you've got those plans and you've still got the drive and the push to keep going even further, into the next decade.
Mm. Yeah, I do. I mean, I've no intention of giving up anytime soon, and I've still got plenty of years left to be an MP and to fight for the values that I believe in. But I'm deeply committed to my constituency. I will never let the people of Romford down. But I'm in Parliament for a purpose. You're here to fight for things you believe in. It's not about just holding positions and jobs and titles and getting honours. Some people love the idea of becoming the right honourable or the sir or a dame or whatever it might be. Too much of that. You should be here for a purpose. You're in politics because you believe in things, you fight for the things for your country. Yes, at the end of the day, you may be honoured because of the service you've given, but it should be because of the service you've given. It shouldn't be because of the fact that you're a buddy of the Prime Minister.
Exactly.
So, I'm here to do a job. I'm here to stand up for Britain. I'm here to represent Romford. And to me, those are the two most important things.
100% agree with you there, Andrew. 100% agree with you there. So we'll move on to our final question for you, Andrew. So finally, what's one piece of advice you give to students in 2024, especially those who are starting university and high school, as I know they would be in the UK currently?
So I would say to them that if you want to go into politics, do it because you believe in things.
Mm.
Even if it's things that I would disagree with, I'd rather someone, and I've got friends on the left of the Labour Party. I actually got on really well with Jeremy Corbyn, would you believe? And you couldn't get anyone more different than me because I respect the fact that he's got opinions and he stands up for what he believes in. He's authentic. He's a genuine person who believes in international socialism. I don't. But the fact that he's got principles, I admire the fact that so I get on all right with him. We have a very good relationship. So whatever your political views, go into politics, not just because you want a political career, go into it because you believe in something and you have the right ideals, you want to fight for something. Otherwise, there isn't any point. Go off and go off to the City of London and earn a load of money through the city. Go off and become a teacher or an accountant or a doctor. Become a footballer, whatever you want to do. But if you want to be a politician, it's not about earning money. It's not about holding titles. It's about changing things and improving things for your country. And that is really what all MPs should be about. And I think a lot of them are. I think a lot of very genuine good MPs. But unfortunately, the Westminster system here, once they're in, some of them change a bit and they get all, starry-eyed about being a minister and everything. Great. We all want to be ministers, but be a minister for a purpose. Don't go into a ministry and just be an addition to the civil service. Go in there to be a change maker. Don't go in just to follow the script and read from the script that you're given. That's not what we're about. And my purpose of being politics is because I believe in things. I want to fight for those values.
I certainly agree with that, Andrew. And at the end of the day, you're there to fight for the people. You're not there for yourself. You're there to represent your constituency and to, represent the whole United Kingdom and put through legislation that can really help and change people's lives. So, if you're there for your own personal game, you really, are in the wrong place. And then, you shouldn't really be a part of Parliament in a sense. But, I guess there are some who are like that, but hopefully it's the overwhelming minority and the majority are there for the right reasons.
Absolutely. And I think the majority do go into it for the right reasons. but some have some are quite vacant about what they believe in. But they're going in for the right reasons. They're not going in just to benefit themselves. But some come in and they don't quite know what they really believe in, and they go with the wind, and they can go in any direction. But I just think we need more politicians of principle, less politicians that are career motivated, more politicians that are here for a purpose. And I'm sure that's the case in Australia. I'm sure that's the case in a lot of countries. And I think that in Britain, particularly in these times, we need people of character and principle and integrity that are here to do a job for Britain rather than to further their own political self-advancement.
Exactly. 100% agree with you there, Andrew. So those are all our questions for the podcast. I do really appreciate you staying on the podcast, Andrew, for nearly an hour, for over an hour here. And
Okay.
it's past 12 a.m. currently in London. So I do really appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking a bit about your career before politics, your time involved in the young institutions of the Conservative Party, your time in Parliament, and advice you'd give to students in 2024, especially those starting university and high school. So from the Donkey Vote podcast team and all our viewers, thank you again for coming on, Andrew, and sparing some time to speak to us.
Thank you.